Okay, good morning, good afternoon, depending whether you had a busy morning breakout session. My name is Goran Boldievski. I'm director of the Open Society Initiative for Europe, which is the European branch of the Open Society Foundations, and I reside in Budapest, in Hungary, nearby. And I have the I have the pleasure to host this great group of 4 panelists to talk about civil society. And I can see that there's a lot of survivors here. It's not only democracy that survived, but a lot of people survive a really 2-day busy conference. So if I play a bit with the title on the survival, I'm really glad that there are a lot of survivors from the conference. It's been 2 really, really full and busy and fruitful days of discussion. Now, what we have a task ahead of us is, sorry, I try to get better with this coughing. We have a paramount task to answer the question of, will civil society save democratic values? Sorry, Murphy's Law. My coughing was really doing well until I started talking. Now, that's a very fairy tale type of question, and before I pass the floor to the 4 panelists, let me play a bit with it. I heard that some Germans are very popular here, like Ms. Merkel, we heard yesterday at the first panel with the 2 prime ministers. Let me invoke 2 Germans that we are not going to refer to in this debate. And those are Brothers Grimm. You know the fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm. And I particularly focus on Cinderella and Snow White, because when I look at these questions, I was afraid that we will portray the civil society either as the prince that comes to save either of these characters, or if we become too much obsessed with ourselves, we will actually start looking as the Cinderella's, as Snow White's stepmother, and looking in the mirror and asking ourselves, you know, mirror, mirror on the wall, you know, are we the right ones to save the democracy in our countries? And we will start being too pretentious about that. So these are debates that I, as a facilitator, will try to avoid at this panel, and we will not refer to any fairy tales, including those of Grimm brothers. What we are going to do is actually, my goal is to unpack this notion, to unpack the notion of democratic values, to unpack the notion of civil society, sorry, and then position it into the context of both Balkan countries, but as well to look broader. And that's why we brought a guest from quite far away, both in terms of geography, but also in terms of various experiences. And the idea is that when I mention about fairy tales, that actually we discuss about civil society, of its tactics, but also we discuss about its premise. And we look where it belongs today and what kind of system it promotes, if it promotes any system at all. And then maybe even at a certain point to ask, who is the civil society? Not only in our own perception, not only in the perception of governments, not only in the perception of activists within the civil society, but also among the broader population. And eventually, if we come out richer from some of those reflections, I believe we will get, if not the answer for the survival of democratic values, at least I think I hope to be richer about some of the experiences, some of the thoughts from the 4 panelists. Now, without further ado, I will start with sort of three short rounds about the initial reflections, and then we hope to open the floor and get more questions and then get the panel going. As you can see, we have 4 panelists, and I believe that's a really great number for a fruitful discussion among ourselves, but also together with you. And I'm not going, please refer to either to the website or to this beautiful guidebook that you got together with the conference package and the materials. I believe it's really worth to look at the CVs and the bios of the 4 panelists and the experience, but they will draw on that. So I believe in their discussion also they will mention some of their experiences. So without further ado, I will start with Gordon, who is the furthest from me and comes from neighboring Croatia, and to ask him more about the sort of how does he see the civil society at the moment in the region, and as well what are the trends that he can observe from his vantage point.
Thank you, Goran. And to answer this question, actually I would start, as you start with a fairy tale, I would try to use the metaphor of a cookbook on what is democracy or how to build democracy. Because through that cookbook, maybe we can understand what is the position of civil society in general in political, academic, and real life. And those cookbooks I'm referring were very popular around 2003, 2004, after the aggression on Iraq, and it started with Afghanistan. And if you look into the academic and think tanks literature, you can find many articles. I can quote just some of them: How to Build Democracy in Iraq, Foreign Affairs magazine. Then there is Beginner's Guide to Nation Building by Rand Corporation, etc., etc. And according to those cookbooks, and what it's maybe very obvious, the democracy, to make a democracy, you need following. You need a multi-party system, and then you need to elect the government to have executive power, and then also you have to have a parliament, legislative power, and then you also have to have the judiciary. And most of the democracy cookbook will stay on these 3 pillars, like executive power, judiciary, legislative power. And then sometimes they will talk also about the importance and the role of the media, independent media, and civil society. But together, media and civil society will be perceived primarily as added value to democracy. It will not be interpreted as one of the pillars of democracy. So it's impossible. People will say if we have a parliament, free elections, and we have multi-party system, we have democracy. However, the reality is, as we know, totally different. If we don't have strong civil society and independent media, the democracy is not functioning. And I think we are still in that trap here in the Balkans, that it's not understood that civil society is, together with the media, one of the key pillars of democracy. But then again, on the other hand, it's not that it's not understood. If we see what's going on, for example, nowadays in Poland, and for now a few years already in Hungary, and we also experienced that luckily only for 6 months in Croatia, when the promotion of this concept of attacking the liberal democracy, what those politicians are doing, they are first targeting civil society and independent media. So that gives us importance back to us, because they do understand that with the free media, free press, with a strong civil society, they cannot implement their policies. So although we can be very frustrated what's going on in those countries and within those politicians who are fighting against liberal democracy concept, it gives us credibility back again. And I can say in Croatia for the last 6 months, we were like back on the streets. We were like back in the 90s, back to the business. We were shaken again from our very comfortable positions of think tanks, advocacy, NGOs, etc. So this is one part of the story. The second part of the story is that we are seeing different dynamics within civil society in general, depending on the region. I would say that our region is still stuck in this momentum that civil society, the main role is to try to be kind of the watchdog, although we are seeing the trend that many civil society organizations are actually taking the role of service providers. And somehow they are incorporated in irregular government activities, and which is, by my opinion, not the primary role of civil society. That is maybe the governmental role, and there should be cooperation, but the watchdog role should be really emphasized as one important one. I still think that in Balkans, we do have good watchdogs, and that civil society has opened some of really big, important cases regarding to the war crimes, corruption, etc. But one mistake we did as a watchdogs, that we've been focusing only on civil and political rights. Unfortunately, we forgot about the huge violation of socio-economic human rights of citizens of Croatia, of Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina. We've been lacking to use this violation of human rights from socio-economic perspective to gain the support of the public in Croatia. Our colleagues from Spain did it in different way, and we will hear very soon that there is another dynamic of civil society which is now going through these civic movements rather through organized NGO groups. And finally, the fourth dynamics I'm noticing is the rise of the right-wing civil society. So the monopoly of being civil society member, it's not anymore only in the hands of so-called left liberal NGOs. We are seeing a merging of different NGOs with extreme right-wing positions whose clear agenda is to attack democracy. And actually now they are competing not only in the funding, but also in the policy and political space for their voices. But I guess later we will talk more about this very important phenomena.
Thank you, Gordon, and hold on your thoughts about the as I call it, the right-wing civil society, because I think that that's actually something that we need to unravel. But before we go into that, you mentioned about the movements and their emergence as addition or sometimes even as an answer to the impotence of the rest of the civil society or the formal civil society sector. I think, Javier, who has this, beautiful T-shirt from his organization, comes from a movement against eviction, and this is actually the story behind the movement is exactly of, the one where you encapsulate the energy through more non-formal organizing rather than formal institutions and NGOs that will be funded either by the state or donors. So, Javier, what's the experience that you bring us from Spain?
Yes. Thank you. Am I being heard? Okay. Thank you, Gordon. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. The platform of people affected by mortgages, like many other grassroots movements in Spain, emerged from the 15M movement, from the Indignados, about 6 years ago. We are focusing on one of the main economical and social problems in Spain, which is the right to housing, the real estate bubble, and the speculation with housing. Though, along with 15M, many other movements arise that are non-professional, that are only run by volunteers and by actually the people who are advocating and fighting for their rights, like movements trying to defend public health, public education, the right and care for the senior citizens, and the anti-fascist movements and anti-racist movements to stop, for example, the places where they reclude or where they keep asylum seekers and undocumented migrants. So back to my main theme. We started running this platform 6 years ago in Spain with just a few assemblies in the main cities. I belong to the Assembly of Valencia, which was the third assembly formed after Barcelona and Murcia. From these assemblies, the movement spread all across the country. To the present day, we have over 240 assemblies in different towns and villages in Spain that are organized with a code of practice and with some very precise and yet simple ethical principles. We do not engage or trade with the advocacy or with the reivindications of our platform, meaning that we don't receive money from the state or from any other public organism. The way we finance ourselves is by donations and solidarity events like concerts, like selling merchandise, t-shirts like these. And that's how we keep our independence. And we also have a strict rule that we do not allow any political advocacy within the platform. That doesn't mean that we do not act politically. We act politically a lot because we bring lots of initiatives and demands to the national and the regional parliaments in Spain. Moreover, we have sued over nearly a dozen of times the Spanish state at the European Court of Justice to claim that the housing and mortgage and economic regulations of Spain are reformed and adapt to the EU Code of Practice on financial instruments and mortgages. And we have won. We have actually caused the Spanish state to produce 3 important and relevant reforms of the mortgage laws and the Consumer Protection Acts. And those reforms have been forced and have been executed from binding sentences of the European Court of Justice. So the fact that we are not aligned with any political party doesn't mean that we do not have a political activity. The other thing that we also care a lot is about the possibilities of capitalizing or using our demands to favor one or other political wing. We act by the principle of if you touch one, you touch all of us, meaning that considering that housing right is a basic human right, we stand for all human rights, gender equality, race justice, right to refugee, right to basic services such as heating, running water, education, healthcare. So we act often, and most of our time, we act in solidarity with other movements that are fighting and claiming for those rights not to be eroded or corrupted or traded by neoliberal policies. All this said, we have become the most relevant social movement in Spain, by far the one with most resonance and with most presence in the media. But we are not in this for being under the spotlights or for being on the covers of newspapers and opening the news shows every night. Is because we're fighting for a very basic principle that our government has seemed to forgot, which is that every family has the right to have a decent home. And that home has to be affordable. And in a situation like we have in Spain with 25% of unemployment rate, if a family can't afford a decent home, then the state should take care of that. And not by welfare, but by generating infrastructure and a network of social housing that is able, at least temporarily, to host families in distress. I think that the social death that represents to become homeless is a situation that no citizen in Europe in the 21st century should be facing. And this is something that we are trying to spread across Europe with other grassroots movements like in Portugal, France, Italy, Germany, Ireland, the UK, now here with our colleagues in Serbia later this evening, and to understand the practicality of fighting for one human right in the framework of fighting collectively for all human rights. And there is no democracy and there is no legitimacy of democracy when human rights are infringed. So if we are talking and discussing here today about saving democracy or surviving democracy with democratic values, then we should very seriously consider that if there is one collective, one politician, one group that is trying to erode or to downgrade the rights of one kind of population, one origin, one gender, one sexual preference, or one political ideology, then that's illegitimate and it's wrong. And that endangers democracy.
Thanks, thanks, Javier. I'll probe you later in the next round a bit more deeper about Podemos, because I think that's also what people would like to hear, and the linkages, but also about this, you know, a very clear ideological stance that you have, which is quite uncommon for most of the NGOs, at least in the Balkans, because sort of having an ideology often is seen like you know, being partisan. There is not much of a distinction here, but we'll come back to that. I want to pass the floor to Jeta Jara from Kosovo, and she's both a media person, but I would say an NGO activist. And a lot of work what she's done is on media, but with the great help of civil society. What's your look on the current situation, and where do you see the sort of the victories and the losses of the civil society within the broader society in Kosovo, but also in the Balkans?
Yeah, I'll start with sharing with you a victory and loss model that we have sort of invented in Kosovo. Maybe that can be used wider. Usually, all of us, I think, start doing what we do with a simple question, rather than changing the world. What is what we're going to do as a reporter? Say, what I'm going to report going to matter? Is it going to be relevant to the people that read you, to your readers, to your viewers? You start from that first. Is it going to be relevant? In our case, we wanted to make a model of investigative journalism which actually is not just read by few, but is seen by the masses. How do we bring the masses? Because we were pretty tired of this civil society attitude where you actually preach to the converted. You disinfect the environment so much that you end up in a corner, marginal, or doing, you know, very, very kind of service providing or round tables. We wanted to reach and bring people to our information that we aimed for. So we caught the momentum when there was an election reform in Kosovo, and the mayors were going to be chosen directly. Not the parties choosing the mayors, but mayors were going to be directly chosen. So we thought if we cannot change national politics in Kosovo, which is very influenced by dialogue and by internationals, we can impact the local governance most. So we decided to do mayoral town hall debates that no other national media was doing. By going to the town halls of every town. Kosovo has 30 towns, and it has this old Tito culture homes that were built. Each little village has one good thing from former Yugoslavia, a town hall that looks the same. So we placed all the mayoral candidates on that stage, similar to this. We opened the floor for all the citizens to come. And we used the network of, we wanted to also take in some good work that was being done by grassroots organizations. So each town had a little local organization that could spread the word that debate was happening, could bring us the best guests to pose the questions, because they know what's happening in their community. And we wanted to use think tanks whose reports were being not read. I mean, so many donors fund think tanks, but we wanted to somehow bring that information to these grassroots organizations. And we, together with GAP, a think tank, we got them to do a survey, an analysis, budget analysis, what that town needs, what are the priorities of that town. So we would put this analysis in the beginning of the debate. Grassroots organization would bring the guests, and we started classic time-measured political election debates. Now, all of this was being done as we were saying to the mayoral candidates, listen, we'll come back to you. Be careful what you're saying, we're recording this promise. Most of them didn't believe it. That was 2007. The last round of, there's been 3 mayoral elections since. We have come back every 2 years to the same stage, putting a TV screen like this and showing the mayor sits here, the one who won the election. Then he sees himself, usually it's a he, 99% of them are men. They see themselves, what they said 2 years ago, and we then measure have they met the promises. So this model, I would call it a triangle civil society model. Now, other media have not followed it because they don't want to go to a 40,000 people town. Nobody thought, first of all, this format in the beginning, it was the space that was given to us by public TV was 11:30 at night, before midnight, when they said nobody will watch and nobody cares about little towns. Okay, 7 big towns with 200,000 people maybe, but they said nobody cares. So we were put at 11:30 at night, and what made the program popular, where we used our investigative journalism to kind of, and bring the people in there, is that we decided that one of the biggest problems of Kosovo, that was before Kosovo became independent, after status resolvement, it was going to be energy, because we were living under energy restrictions, 4 hours on, 4 hours off. So the quality of life of every citizen was ghastly in Europe, to be living with lack of electricity in 21st century Europe. So we made that a priority of our local election debates. When if you wonder why we didn't have electricity, it's because people weren't paying their bills. So not paying the bills was used in former Yugoslavia in the 90s as a resistance to Milosevic's state. You didn't pay the bill, therefore you somehow peacefully resisted. So because Kosovar Albanians didn't have the power to resist militarily, so they formed this kind of resistance by not paying bills. So that culture was damaging us in a post-war Kosovo. So we made payment of electricity bills a point of discussion. We got hold of all the 300 candidates all over Kosovo. We got hold of their bills, and we're reading out loud in front of TV while live the show was going on how much each mayor was owing in electricity bills. People came with popcorns to watch like a Latin American soap opera. Not because they cared about the politics and think tank and the grassroots questions, but to wait for the last moment where the politician was going to be asked about the electricity bill. Now, the effect it had is, first, the head of the public TV went to his wife and said, let's pay that bill, because somebody's going to come to us and ask us. From then onwards, the Kosovo Electric Company, KEK, told me that 40% rise was affected in payment of bills, of electricity bills, and eventually, not because only of the program, but our payment of electricity bills got better. But what this did to the program is that it made it from 11:30 at night, suddenly we could not be ignored and be the marginal kind of the liberal voice, the NGO voice that is a nuisance, as you need to put it in some conference room only. In the end, this is the bright side of this. Every 2 years, we persisted, we came back. This format, even today, is alive. Next year, we have a local elections, we will film the promise. Last year, we had the post-election debate where we did the accountability debate, the post-election, where we ask whether promises are made. But the dark side of all of this is that, of course, that when we investigated whether the promises were met, there was one mayor who was a former guerrilla fighter and said, in my town, you don't come in and ask where I spend the money. I don't like what you're doing. They attacked our team. What happened is they attacked the team and took the tape away after the attack, thinking that we didn't prepare, in a sense that we prepared. We had an extra filming of that attack in a drive, because we sort of assumed what can happen in some of these places. We broadcasted, 3 months later, we broadcasted that attack in a freedom of speech day. The next day, after broadcasting that, for 10 days in a row, we had front page attacks that we were working for Serbia. We were Serbian spies, that our reports were being cooked, as they said, in Belgrade kitchens, and that my name, which means life, that someone has, my name means life, and I have shortened my own life by making that program. So this is what the mayor said in front pages, which were read in evening news every night. So the dark side of all of this fight, will civil society survive, is you have to pay a price. Of course it will survive, but we all pay a price for what we do, as well as in popularity of our work or not, relevance. And we pay a price if we're challenging the corrupt politicians. The price we had to pay is that from 2009, we took this man to court. We took this man to court, to an EU court, by EU judges, which we thought would be much less influenced by the political elite, and we lost the case. So while we are the biggest fighters in Kosovo, you're as well looking at the biggest losers in terms of having lost this case, legal case. So the judge decided that all the threats that we were getting were not physical. So if we were still alive and well, therefore, the attack on our credibility does not constitute a threat. The man is today, where are we? We lost the case, but he's on trial for war crimes, because he's done many other bad things apart from just attacking us. Now, conclusion from that is that we'll get to the conclusion, but my colleagues, it's not just us, my colleagues here in Serbia are paying a different price. They challenged Vučić, the prime minister who's sitting here yesterday, and they were attacked similarly in a similar newspaper, Informer, for days in a row, and it's not just days in a row, it's lasting for months, not just Burn Serbia. Krik, who's in the panel and will speak here, is being attacked. You pay the price. In the end, also you pay the price in a donor sense. What happened after Burn Serbia did an investigation on Vučić? Informer attacked it, and they start scaring the donors. The donors started saying, oh, maybe we shouldn't fund these investigative journalism. So all I'm saying that even it's a cat and mouse game. We will continue playing because we want to be relevant to people you report to. That's your first, if that's your first loyalty. Second loyalty, if the donors have to pull out, if some politician threatens you, we have to invent tactics. And I need to talk about these tactics. Tactics we invented in Kosovo is that we really united with other NGOs, think tanks. We already established this triangle relationship with grassroots think tanks, who then wrote letters, when we were attacked, wrote letters to 150 parliamentarians, 70 organizations, wrote letters on my behalf to the entire world and all the organizations that deal with human rights. They really held my back. I'm afraid to say this is what organized criminals do. They hold each other's backs in cartels, and all I can tell you that we need to convert some of those tactics for the good. And this is what we do. When I'm attacked, I have people to call up to and to mobilize, to defend. And this is the only way we can kind of beat the system a little bit, by organizing with the same tactics that the organized crime works. How do you believe these politicians do what they do, the threats? By calling their own media, by calling their own gangs to threaten us. We need to do the same. I'm sorry. We need to do the same by calling up and challenging our donors, saying, well, if you don't fund us, we're going to speak about this. If you don't fund us because of the investigation we're doing, we're going to talk about this. We have to raise the bar, and we have to call up our friends, our think tanks, our grassroots to unite and do the maximum we can. This is where the game is. Who's got more friends? We're going to challenge. Who's got more friends and more legitimacy in front of the people? That's the one who's going to win in the end.
Thanks, Jeta. Now, Dragana, I know I asked you something else. I'll throw one more question. I ask you to provide your overview of what's happening. But my additional question will be, we heard about what's the price that the NGOs are paying and what price the journalists are paying, but do you think that the politicians are paying a price of exposure of their not exactly democratic values and these pressures of the kind that Jetta was just talking about? Do you think that this kind of action brings, brings them to lose votes, to lose elections? Do you think that civil society and this type of action combining civil society and media causes damages to non-democratic politicians?
Thank you for inviting me. Hello, everyone. I think they do, but actually they have money, they can handle it, they know how to deal with it. So we can do a story, we can reveal that the mayor of Belgrade has connections with several offshore companies, and that he obtained 5 million euros luxury apartments, 5 million euros worth of luxury apartments in Bulgaria from the person that he was dealing with in one privatization case, which was described as a corruptive deal by the Anti-Corruption Council in Serbia. That was 10 years ago. So even though we revealed this case and 2 more of them, and we also published official documents to prove the story and everything. So that somehow damaged his reputation as a politician and so on. But those people have enough money to, as he told me personally when he refused for I don't know how many times an interview with us about the story, when he said, I lost a month to prove that you published fake documents, that my signature was forged and so on, so I will get the case in the court and then I'm going to sue you. So as I said, they're in power, they have money, they have under control most of the media in Serbia, mainstream media. As Jetta said, what the tabloids did to our colleagues from Birn after they published the story. The same stuff happened to us from the beginning of when we started to work and when we established CRIC as an NGO and published our website. So from the beginning of our work, we are under the attack, and the constant smear campaign against us is going on by the media that are under control by the government. So that happened several times, and once it was, as Jetta mentioned, these campaigns in a row that happens in a former tabloid, which published articles about our editor Stevan Dujanovic on the cover pages saying that he's a French spy, masochist, and whatever. They posted some photos, so they published this kind of stuff in several days in a row. So a lot of times we had to deal with these things. We have to keep reminding our readers that all the stories that we publish are based on official documents from our institution in Serbia, and since the stories are cross-border stories, like that one related to Mayor of Belgrade, which has a relation with Bulgaria. So all the documents are official, and all the stories that we publish are fact-checked. So every single word is fact-checked and everything. So we have to deal with it. But what I can't believe that is going on. Okay, the government and the top of the officials that we are revealing the stories about corruption, that they have connections with them. What's the worst thing is that citizens, not our readers who are supporting us, but the others who are hiding themselves behind some anonymous tweet accounts or anonymous Facebook accounts, they're starting to attack us. So that's what's really, like, that's maybe the worst thing to me. Like, we're doing investigative journalism because that's really a job that we love to do. Like, I was volunteering for years, and I don't mind doing investigative stories to reveal the corruption cases related to top officials in Serbia, like as a volunteer, for example. So when we do that, we want our citizens in Serbia to see what are they doing and how they're spending our money, and we want to show them the corruption and organized crime cases, and we want to see them how all these things affect to all our lives here in Serbia. So we want them to understand what's going on here. So after that, we are just facing the situation that they are attacking us. So maybe they're paid to do that, but those citizens who should also...
Because one thing is to have trolls online, and we know that the governments, regrettably, in this region, have hired trolls to do that. But beyond the trolls, because you mentioned, okay, the government has money, they have political power, and we fight back with the truth. And speaking truth to power is never an easy thing, and frankly, never a pleasant thing in all societies. Where do you think you drive your legitimacy, apart from the truthfulness in the story? Because I feel, and please correct me if my sense is wrong, I feel a sense of a disappointment that, you would have expected more people to come and rally behind your cause, but they didn't. You actually have more people who troll you online and insult you rather than supporting your cause. Or maybe I'm just... Or do you think that among the general population you have the sort of the support and the power, or where do you get additional legitimacy or credibility apart from the correctness and the truthfulness of your story?
There are more and more now, since we're getting more and more popular, because we are online media, so that's why those are the people that are commenting and attacking us online. But sometimes, since our stories are reported in other media and print media, so we have the readers in that field, or for example, but it's not that they're not supporting. I don't know how many of them are not supporting us or doing that, but we have a support from our readers and citizens. And we realized that when we started the crowdfunding campaign after the stories about the mayor of Belgrade, Siniša Mali, and when our readers realized that they are starting to attacking us through the pro-government media, so then we started a crowdfunding campaign, and then we realized that it's really functioning. We didn't expect it that we will get from them, I don't know, around 8,000–9,000 euros per several months. So till now we have around 400 individual donors, which are citizens, students, and people that are older or former professors or wherever. Somebody who's living in a village in central Serbia, they just maybe have an internet connection and reading our website. Maybe not, maybe they heard on the news, but they just understand the news and they know if they saw something that is really not reported as it's on our website, but just spin story or something like that. So. And most of them are...
in Serbia who has maybe 4,000 or 40,000 supporters like that? You have 400, which is a really commendable number. Do you know somebody, or an NGO, it doesn't need to be a media, who has 4,000 or 40,000 supporters?
I don't know, but I just wanted to add that almost half of those individual donors are not living in Serbia anymore. They left this country because everything was going on here and what happened before during 90s and so on, but somebody should continue this job, which is really tough and not easy, and we should also pay the prices. Jeta said we're all paying it.
So when do you think you will reach the number of supporters to 40,000?
So they are now our readers expecting us to give them some better and better stories, since we published a story about Ministry of Health, Zlatibor Lončar, which wasn't showed, they didn't show that on the Uncensored Lies, if you know the exhibition of Uncensored Lies. They showed screenshots of all of our stories, but they didn't show that one, so it was censored and Uncensored Lies in their exhibition. And also a story about revealing the property of the Prime Minister Aleksandar Vučić and member of his family and so on. So now we are finishing the whole database of all property of all ministers now in this government. So as it happened several times after we publish a big story, they just start attacking us, and people then start to call us and send us messages supporting us, and then they start to make a donation and to support.
Okay, I'll let you talking about the activities, but later I will come back with the 40,000 supporters question. So give it a thought. When do you think that you will have? The reason why I'm asking, and I'll move to Gordon. The reason is why I'm asking is actually, living in Budapest, in Hungary, I have also a chance to follow the Hungarian civil society and the developments there. Within European Union. And one of the things that shocked me basically earlier this year was basically a representative representative poll which was administered in person, where basically when people were asked of civil society, the majority of Hungarians equated the civil society with the civil or Magyar Garda, which actually is the right-wing civil society that patrols the streets of a number of villages to protect the Hungarians. In the past it used to be Roma. Today, it's more like whatever, imaginary migrants, because the real migrants are at the border here. And not only that I was in disbelief, but a lot of civil society representatives were in disbelief because they thought that actually it's the progressive civil society that will be the first image among the average citizen, not the right-wing civil society. And it also opened quite a lot of soul-searching among organizations there about the constituency and also about their reach beyond the capitals, beyond the sort of the liberal, more sort of, let's call it elite or student population. And it led to an amazing discovery of a sector that was always there, that was always strong, but somehow a lot of people, I could even put myself in that, turn a blind eye. And that's of a really strong sector, which I called right-wing civil society. I mean, not only what's happening in Croatia, because we know that you have it as well, but Gordon, how do you see the trends? And is this something that I sort of worry from my vintage point of Budapest that is an outlier, or is it something that you observe that it exists also in the region here, and the right-wing civil society is there? We just turn a blind eye on that.
I think that everyone sitting in this room probably saw it by their own eyes, that it really exists. It is getting stronger, and it's making a mess, also in a policy arena, depending on the country where you are. And why did that happen? It happened from one side that the classical so-called progressive human rights NGOs were, for the last 26 years, were dealing with very unpopular topics as human rights, protecting the minorities, protecting the LGBT, protecting the asylum seekers, usually working on protection of those who are in real danger from the majority of population. So we know that we have been unpopular since we have been established. We actually, until lately, never enjoyed the support of general public, because the general public really didn't like the Serbs in Croatia. They didn't like the gays in Croatia. They didn't like Romas in Croatia. We can talk about other countries as well. So we've been dealing with very unpopular topics, protecting very vulnerable, exposed group, and somehow forgot to explain maybe that this golden rule, if you are attacking one person, if you are violating human rights of one person, it will come back to you sooner or later. That's one thing. Second thing is that EU accession process has really absorbed a lot of capacity of Balkan civil society, I can say for Croatia, and I think it was a good investment. I mean, if we did something, if we really change legislation, if we really improve the human rights situation and other legislation, it's thanks to the EU accession process. But what happened in that EU accession process, that we had been in this very elitistic position. We've been talking with the Brussels, with all foreign embassies. Sometimes we've been talking with the Croatian politicians, but we were very important, and we also again forgot about the people. I think it's important to keep on working that civil society is very much involved in EU accession process, because there is an opportunity to shape the laws, to improve the legislations, not in all sectors, not in maybe economic sector, but in human rights sector for sure. But we should constantly have eyes open what is going on in the real world, so to say, not in outside of the negotiation process. And in the real world, what we have seen from the right-wing movement, that they are very smartly using populistic propaganda related to the family, marriage, history issues, which can mobilize the people. And they have used that opportunity to position themselves in a public space. However, they are not so powerful. There are some serious problems within the right-wing movement. I will just emphasize a few of them. First, they suffer of tremendous lack of transparency. So to investigate the right-wing movement, their finances, how they are making decisions, it's a very difficult task. And this is a very important role of journalists. And I think in Croatia they did a great job actually investigating who is behind those extreme right-wing movements. And very easily you will see how the money is coming from the church, how the money is coming from the United States, or how the money is coming from Russia. So lack of transparency is one very weak point of them. Second weak point is that there are different influences of shaping the right-wing movement. One is coming from the United States, from their right-wing movement, and the other one is coming from the Russian, not right-wing movement, but the Russian official politics, unfortunately. And then we have seen really the conflicts when they come together. They have big issues about the positioning of Russia and the United States. So sometimes they're in that kind of the conflicts. And there are serious conflicts between the right-wing movement about the economy issues. Half of them are extreme neoliberal. They want to privatize everything. But other half of them are extreme anti-neoliberal. They are like national socialists. So they want that the state privatize everything what is possible. So those are the weak points where actually they are facing their internal conflicts and producing the fights within themselves. However, they are now on the agenda. They are using human rights mechanism to reduce democracy. I will not say to destroy, maybe it's too hard word to say, but for sure this, reduce democracy. They want to get rid of any critical approach towards the power system in any field. And what I think how we can handle this situation is that we take over the populist discourse on the real citizens' needs. This is what has happened in Spain. So if there is a real problem with socio-economic rights, with evictions, with bank loans, this is something that established civil society has started to work on, and also to look what the movements are emerging in our countries and start immediately to collaborate with those movements. Because otherwise, the right wings, NGOs will take over those movements. In Croatia, we have seen different also stories about that. For example, around movements around free and human rights education was done by human rights organizations. So we managed to take over that movement. Or the movement around protecting the public goods as Croatian sea and public railway, public roads. So that was also hijacked by Croatian, I would say, progressive civil society movement. However, you know all that there is a political party called Bridge, and recently we got another party, Živi Zid, or Live Wall, how to translate it. They build it up, their position on evictions, on need for the reform, but they are coming from a totally extreme right-wing background, although they are hiding that very well. And this is again where we need journalists really to disclose those information, who is actually behind those movements. So this collaboration with new movements which are emerging about the public goods, about socio-economic rights, with established NGOs, think tanks, who at the same time has to work on daily human rights protection, has to work on EU accession issues, but they, and all of us, we have to find time also to make really bridges with the new movements which are emerging to ensure that those movements will be grounded in real democratic and human rights grounds, not to be hijacked by the right wings.
Thanks. Javier, you were talking about we want to have a financial sovereignty of the family, and obviously family is something which is important to the Church, Catholic Church in Spain as well. Did they support your movement?
No, actually we do have legal issues against several dioceses, against the bishops, because there are in many towns the church owns apartments, owns homes that are renting to families. And when these families are in distress and cannot pay timely for their rental, the diocese evicts them. They sue them in the court and they bring them to eviction. So we often try to stop evictions and to and we you know, our movement, we go with people to be human barricades against the officials of the courthouses and the authorities that are trying to evict families. So we're often fighting against the Catholic Church for them not to evict families in distress. It is a complete hypocrisy. It is completely irrational for an institution such as the Catholic Church to evict a family whose parents are unemployed and can't afford the rent. Is there any bigger incongruence than that? So of course our movement has many detractors, agents that don't like us, banks to begin with, because we are raising the awareness and we're pointing out to banks as the ones to blame of taking advantage of the deregulation caused by the neoliberal policies of the 80s. So that's why they were able to come up with all these speculative financial products like mortgages, high-risk mortgages, and fast-track mortgages, and mortgages in foreign currency, and all sorts of sophisticated financial products that we're giving to people that are actually quite uneducated financially and that never knew what they were signing. So ordinary citizens, working class, have been constantly abused by all sorts of statements to go into debt, to buy things that they later cannot afford, and only to benefit the big financial powers, the big financial statements.
But tell me now, for example, because obviously you said the M15 movement brought a lot of different movements and brought a big political party. Would you characterize Spain at this moment as being in a post-neoliberal stage? And would you say that now with so many movements around, with a lot of volunteers, that the civil society and its values are getting into a better direction, that you're a healthier democracy than you were 5 years ago?
Yes and no. We have a new gag law that directly attacks groups like ours. The reform of the Security Act in Spain has brought formerly what used to be fines for protesting in the streets of 600 euros to 3,000 euros. Now the fines go from 3,000 euros to 600,000 euros, depending on the evaluation of the judge. So gag laws are all over Europe, not only in Spain. And those are the tactics of the right fascist kind of governments to fight and to repress and to keep silent movements that are trying to raise awareness on injustice.
Mm-hmm. Very short question, because everybody here thinks you're all Podemos. You know, we are not so nuanced about the understanding. We saw the rise of Podemos. Can you just explain a bit what happened afterwards? That actually there is Podemos, but there also, how do you resolve this? I mean, your movement that obviously started with the same movement that brought Podemos into the parliament and so on. But where are the linking points? Where are the boundaries, if there are any, between the political party and all these movements that you were talking about?
Well, I guess that Podemos emerged in a scenario where there were people trying to regenerate left or United Left or the Communist Party. So people from many different left-oriented political ideology got together and find each other on the 15M movements and squares, and they saw the opportunity of generating a political party that could run for the elections and actually occupy the institutions from the indignados point of view. The PA and all the movements that emerged from the 15M indignados movement, we saw that maybe the political agenda of Podemos would be all about our claims, and it didn't turn out that way. Many of our claims are there, but accessing the power and having to work and maneuver in the state organization is way too different from the social movements. So the paths are different, the times are different, and the steps are different. Moreover, the independence of us political movements is something that once somebody becomes an elected charge is lost. Then you have many political compromises by becoming an elected charge, a politician, than we in the grassroots movements don't have. We can face anybody and we can throw the truth to the face regretlessly. And politicians have to be politically correct. We don't have to be politically correct. We actually have to be strong and vindicative and reivindicative with our claims. There are many people from the social movements that have ended up and have run for positions in Podemos, which I think that some of them are doing a great job. But in our organization, for example, we have a rule that when somebody is running for an elected charge, has to abandon the spokesperson, or all the other responsibilities that you have inside. You cannot have two hats. Either you are in the movement or you are an elected charge. So if it comes to the point, like Ada Colau in Barcelona, the mayor of Barcelona, mayoress of Barcelona, she resigned to be the spokesperson of La PA, and a year afterwards, she ran for the elections for the municipality of Barcelona. And like her, many others. And I think that's the right thing to do. And for us to be independent and non-partisan, and I insist that we are not politically aligned, but we do a lot of political work. We do a lot of political reivindication. And we want to remain that way. We want to remain independent and transparent and non-compromised by political agendas, because that independence gives us all the space and the freedom to complete our tasks. We couldn't be suing the Spanish state, for example, if we had members of our platform in political positions. And we gain more and we do more for the citizens, we do more for the working class by being this independent and being able to sue the Spanish state and teaching other countries, other groups, how to sue their own states to fight for basic rights when their own internal regulations are wrong, or at least breaching the EU principles. We do more that way than if we were in offices, in political positions.
Thanks for that, and at least to me it resonates with some of the challenges that we've seen also in the sector here in many countries, where you have a social energy, actually a social energy of protest, to be very precise, but then how to transfer it into political energy and political power, that seems to be a really, really difficult task. And you know, here in the region we've seen from Bosnia, Montenegro, Macedonia now, we can see even here in Belgrade, there are movements that are based on either on an issue or a protest, and then they really galvanize quite significant support outside of the political spectrum. Of course, always political parties will try to use that energy for existing political parties for their own benefit, but I would say that it exists. But the transfer in many ways is not there. And I would say still there is a lot of stigma of NGO people going into politics, you know, especially when they will be against those in power, that there is always a tendency to portray them that they use their NGO life as a springboard for a political career. And I think this is something with the energies that we have to sort of, you know, sort out.
The difference between our grassroots movements and ordinary NGOs is that all the movements that are arisen from the 15M, we're not professionals. We are volunteers. We don't make a living from participating in these movements. I have a job that is completely separated from these cause, and I dedicate most of my spare free time to the movement, and so are most of my fellows. Many people are unemployed. Many of them are on unemployment benefits, and none of us is making a living out of the movement, and also applies to the healthcare, education, senior citizen, LGBT. They are not professionals.
That's actually quite different. There is a volunteer-based civil society in a lot of countries here in the region, but I would say most of those that are recognized would be the professionalized, I mean, people who employ that. I mean, nothing bad about that. It's just that it's quite different. Let's get to the two journalists on the panel, because I wanna get your sense about where is the energy. I mean, you heard we talked about the right-wing civil society. We talked about sort of the movements, the existing civil society. I mean, the two of you observe what's happening, not only in your countries as well, broader in the region. If you find an energy, where would you find it? Would you find it? I mean, as Gordon and I were talking about is it with the more conservative or even more radical right-wing civil society? Is it with the emerging protest movement? Is it with the NGOs? Is it with somebody else, the businesses? Where do you see that energy for, as our ambitious title states, for saving democratic values in society? Who wants, Jeta or Dragana?
Well, just as an outsider, I may be naive, but let me be the outsider in this country and name where I see the energy in this country of people actually fighting the battle and not being able to push back. You have this before. Everybody used to tell me, well, in Serbia, people are so tired of protests. They would never protest since Milosevic's time. They united against Milosevic, but it's difficult to unite for other values. Now you have this yellow duck movement that's trying to save the city. People are being criminalized. Yes, that's a risk. They need support. They need support from bigger civil society in Serbia. Nevertheless, you have an emerging new kids on the block, which is hopeful. I come as an outsider. I've been following this country as well as I'm a fighter in mine, and I'm a bit of a follower of the neighbor. As a neighbor, I'm happy that exists. I'm happy you have, right now, it's sad that a big activist of Serbia, like Nataša Kandić, had to lose a battle against a general she named as the war criminal in her investigations. She did human rights investigation, named the general as a war criminal, and he sued her he sued her for the pain that caused to his soul. So the man who was responsible for killing people sued her for the pain he caused to his soul and won. And her fund now, yesterday was decided that they have to pay 5,000 euros to this war general in this country. Nevertheless, this battle she's fighting and continuing to do persistently and boringly for some people. So what she did 20 years ago, still she exists, and this general has to face this woman, even though she has to pay for it. Third, you have in this battle that I saw an incredible drama of Vučić feeling yesterday, for me as an outsider, to see how under risk from public opinion he feels to be the pro-Russian public opinion, while this is a man we journalists know is being criticized for controlling the media. He was presenting himself as a person who's under siege from media and from pro-Russian public opinion. Well, you have a great activist that is ousting these organizations called Jelena Milic, and who's a part of this society here, and is published reports where she listed all the pro-Russian organizations. Openly, whoever of the Serbian public that wants to see what is Russia doing in this country can go and look. That information exists. So that sort of thing, KRIK, now producing a new investigative journalism online platform where the citizens are paying. You don't have this in the rest of the Balkans, where citizens contribute, are giving 1,000 dinars to KRIK. 1,000, I think that's great. 1,000 is more, 1,000 and 1,000 and 1,000, little by little. This is where you draw your legitimacy, in my view, when you answer the question. So this is what I'm hopeful for. In Kosovo, I think we're learning now the next battle that we're learning from organizations, even like movements, like Javier was talking about, is that international organizations have to be as watched, as monitored, as are local institutions. We are fighting we have invented two new projects. One is monitoring the EU process of negotiations, because our leaders in Brussels signed 16 agreements in 2011. Serbia and Kosovo signed 16 agreements. We wanted to turn the floor back to actually monitoring the implementation of the agreements. We saw Dayton Peace Accords, which wasn't implemented. We saw all sorts of Oslo Peace Accords that weren't implemented. We now want to monitor agreements. Out of our monitoring, 16 agreements that have been signed, only 4 have been fully implemented. It means that in maths, if it took 5 years to implement 4 agreements that were signed between Serbia and Kosovo, it will take another 15 to implement the rest of the agreements. So this is we're turning the floor a little bit on the mediator, EU, saying you cannot just pile and pile agreement after agreement and accept that you will have the camera shot looking good, but in the field, they don't get implemented. So we have to embarrass not just two sides, but a little bit embarrass and provoke the mediator too. So we have to take that extra floor, extra level. We have to take our oversight monitoring an extra level. On one hand, we're putting EU in the spot as well as our leaders. On the other hand, we're putting World Bank in the spot. We are fighting a big battle in Kosovo where the World Bank wants to finance a very untransparent third coal power plant in Kosovo. We found out that it's, when you know that World Bank is going to support it, what we're using as a tool, when you just said, what's the tool? I thought the question was, what's the tool you use? We are going to World Bank rules. We are looking at them and asking the bank to respect its own rules when it will displace people, because it unlawfully wants to displace entire villages in Kosovo by financing this coal plant. We are looking at, say, the fact that the World Bank wants to finance this project, but it hasn't done environmental assessment and social impact assessment. It wants to do it. And all these institutions come to our countries and kind of pretend to be to want to finance something without actually respecting standards. So we're calling on the World Bank to respect its own standards, and we're doing this as a consortium of about 10 NGOs, think tanks, investigative journalism, and grassroots organizations. We have just, the effect is that we have made the World Bank to be more transparent in publishing lots of reports and considering when it puts the vote out to vote this power plant or not, it will be the most controversial project in Europe that the bank has to support. We're just raising, putting the spotlight on them too.
Dragan, anything to add? Your view of where is the energy in society?
Well, I would also add about this crowdfunding. So since you all know that funds are very important for doing investigative journalism, and I would also like to point that, as Jeta mentioned, there is that fear among the donors, so they would like to skip any trouble with the politicians in Serbia, for example, the people from the embassies and the other organizations that might give a donation to the organization that are doing investigative journalism. So they would rather give us money, for example, to organize conferences and something like that, training on investigative journalism and so on, but they are not brave enough to give us money to do investigative stories in which we will reveal corruption cases related to and connected to top officials in Serbia. So that's one of the problems for the job that we are doing now for the future. So, but on the other side, we are keeping this crowdfunding campaign on and on. But if we meet here next year, I hope it will be 4,000.
Okay, thanks for getting back on my question. I'm curious, where your ambitions are. Okay, I'll pass the floor to you, but I will not do that without throwing a provocation, which is not my coughing. I apologize for that. But the provocation is the following: a critique of this critical civil society will say that people like Natasha Kandic and Jelena, whom I respect dearly and I know well, and I respect their work, that basically they skew the impression of the regular civil society, the one that goes in the villages, the one that works in the small towns, and maybe it's about family, maybe it's about evictions, or maybe it's about ordinary things. It's not about war criminals and Russian influence and so on. And in a way, that the critique goes, it's not my own critique, the critique goes that because of these vocal people, the general population gets an impression that civil society is all about these highbrow things which are further away from us, about who will win the next Cold War, US or Russia, and where we fall, or issues of human rights which maybe are very distant from the ordinary life of people. So I just throw it into the debate as a provocation, not because I necessarily agree with this criticism. So we have quite some time, and I would suggest that we start with questions, and please introduce yourself, and if you have a specific question for one of the panelists, please tell us. If you really feel to provide a context, keep it to 2 sentences, okay? Thanks. Gentleman here.
Thank you. My name is Theo Korysinski, and I'm from Norway. I don't think that critical questions should be perceived as provocations from either the panel or for the others. And I think it's a fact in most countries that the media, the classical media, television, radio, newspapers, most of them love conflicts. And they love, actions, demonstrations, if they are illegal, if they are very dangerous, if it's about climbing or jumping or doing some sort of stunt. Media will love to give them more media coverage compared to, more traditional NGOs. This we all know. Okay, I'm more worried about some of you, especially Javier, maybe, that maybe I think could be a little bit more open for the fruitful division of labor between the sort of very grassroots or grassroots movements that you represent, and the necessity of both division of labor, but also cooperating and at least understanding the necessity of more so-called responsible NGOs, and also the importance of working through political parties of a traditional sort. I mean, you can obtain a lot, of course. And it's very important that organizations like yours exist, like it's very important that more traditional human rights organizations exist. But thinking about output, thinking about the betterness of social life, economic life, cultural rights, political rights, human rights in general, for the ordinary public has to, go through legislation, often dull, often bureaucratic, often very slow legislation, in order to reach the whole population. So my question will be, do you agree with me and with others that it is both important that you have these so-called responsible political parties, Podemos and others, at the same time that you have the traditional NGOs and that you have more grassroots, spontaneous, non-professional in a way, organizations like you. And it is both the divisional labor, but it is foremost the cooperation and the mutual understanding of different functions working together.
Thanks.
This is the way to obtain results in the long run.
We'll get back to the question. I'm glad that in Norway, you know how to ask a Balkan length of questions. 2 sentences in the Balkans usually means exactly what you said. But thank you for a great question. Second or third question, let's collect a couple of more. So we have the question about the division of labor between the grassroots and the professional NGOs. Sorry, I can't hear the gentleman in the front, and I'll pass the floor later to you. No, first hear the gentleman. Okay. No. Okay, obviously, okay. Go ahead.
Okay, let me start. Johanna Daimler, Southeast Europe Association in Munich. I'm triggered a bit by yesterday's comment on which values we might defend on the democracy, which democracy we are defending. So isn't it a conservative value to be respected, that it's the family again, so that we have a repatrialization? So we shall discuss about which democratic values we would defend. My question is the influence of religious communities, which are very strong. So we have been talking about the Catholic Church in Croatia, obvious, but we do have other religious communities which are playing on the same ground. So if you can share it a bit more on this religious context and interlinkages with new emerging NGOs, civil society movements, which we consider more right-wingers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And let's go with one more question, and then I'll get back to the panel with the 3 questions, okay?
Hello, my name is Miloš Mutic. I work at the Youth Initiative for Human Rights here in Belgrade. And what I see here, my question is about the region, is that obviously funding for civil society is quite a big topic right now, and obviously is an issue for the near future. So in order to answer the question of for today's panel, I would like to ask you, do you think that maybe we need to rethink funding for NGOs in the region? Maybe think about a regional crowdfunding source or a website, something that CRIC has obviously had a little bit of good luck with, but a lot of other organizations do have trouble with funding, and obviously if you're doing something that's critical of the government, you may have trouble of getting funding from traditional donors. So what are the avenues for alternative ways of trying to find funding for civil society in the region and perhaps globally as well? Because if you really want investigative journalism, you have to pay for it, and you're either going to pay for a good newspaper or you're going to fund CRIC. Yeah. So yeah, alternative funding for civil society.
Alternative funding. Then we have which democracy values are we defending, also with the context of the religious communities, not only the Catholic community and the division of labor. And I suggest let's start from Gordon and going this way, and I'll pick one or two and then respond to the questions. And I will leave you for 1 minute to have my coughing in private, and I will come back. So Gordon, and this way in the panel. Thanks.
Okay, first just the reflection about religious rights. And this is also big confusion which is now produced in a public space, that actually the left liberal NGOs are attacking religion and religious groups by attacking right-wing extremism. And the values are not questionable. I mean, in democratic states, we have made agreement on the values. And I don't think that we need to have more discussion on that. For me, the problem is only when the right-wing groups are using deliberately democratic instruments to destroy or reduce the democracy. And one of the values which is also very well recognized, and I think we have consensus, at least in Europe, around it, it's secularism. So, of course, when we are seeing the attacks on the idea of secularism, which is for me one of the main preconditions of functioning democracy, that we have to react. In that sense, I would really divide the religious rights from the things that some religious groups are proposing in the public as attack on their rights. And to the end of that part of the question, I also think that it is not the best solution that us, liberal NGOs, are actually arguing with them. The best is when the religious groups are standing against their colleagues who are exaggerating in their views. So unfortunately, there are still no such a developed civil society within progressive religious group. There are Catholics for Choice, for example, in the United States. But in Europe, and I know in Croatia, we tried to encourage several progressive Catholics to stand clearly and stop this mess about in the discourse on the religious and the rights, but for them it's really difficult. So one of the objections we are having, really not us to speak around that, but really to leave that space and find the people who can talk within the Catholic Church about the limits, as the Pope Francis at the moment is talking about. So this is my position on that. And second, very shortly on the funding, I would just shortly go back to this idea that if you take the government money, that then you are not independent. You also suggested that, and we've been listening to that from time to time. To one point, I agree on that. But in general, if you go back to my initial words when I told that civil society should be the equal pillar as political parties, as the parliament, as the president office, as the judiciary, then actually I think that what we are doing, we are protecting the public goods. I think what you are doing in Spain with your movement, you are the best example of protecting the public good, which should be financed by the state as well, if the state is okay. So otherwise, we can also then challenge the Constitutional Court. So why they are getting the money from the public sources? Maybe we should put pressure on them that they should do some self-financing to open the restaurant, and like 20% they should earn. Of course, that will be ridiculous, but it's not ridiculous when we are talking about civil society. So I really think that the hardcore watchdogs organization should be financed by the state. But also, as my colleague from Kosovo said, we have to send a clear message that we will not be corrupted because of that. Immediately, we will act and react on each injustice we are seeing from the government. And I think that many NGOs are succeeding in that. I mean, I'm very proud on my small NGO. People try to blame us that we are like more closer to this or that party, but this is ridiculous. We have made so much damage to social democrats in the last 4 years, maybe more than to some conservatives, because we don't care at the end about the left and the right. So it's about the reputation, about our actions, what we do in daily life, how we are actually handling that money, how we are reporting, and how our political stands are in public. It will be perfect for us that some politician called us and said, come on, we gave you the money, so please be quiet. Immediately we will call the press and release that information. So I think this is the kind of reputation, the courage we should have within watchdogs organization, and insist that we are working for public good and that we should be paid from the from the state budget, same as the judges are paid, same as the MPs are paid, same as the president is paid, if we have agreement on the public good. However, in Croatia, we recently experienced sudden cut of funding when you have the sudden change of the government. They immediately cut everything what they could. And for last 2 or 3 years, we are thinking about these alternative ways of funding. But I'm very much against for us NGOs to open the restaurants, because we have a lot of things to do anyway. So I don't want to be a restaurant manager and get the money from the restaurant, etc. But we are now trying to build self-sustainable system of different institutions that can actually support civil society. Maybe it sounds for you crazy, but we are almost there to establish the first ethical bank in Croatia, which will be recognized by Croatian National Bank. So we will call the citizens to open the accounts in this ethical bank. It's a movement across the Europe. And part of the profit of this ethical bank will go to the foundations to support civil societies. Also, we have been established, mostly with the refugees and asylum seekers, first social enterprises, like they open the restaurants, so not us activists, but they do open the restaurants, which are grounded and founded by also several NGOs. So also some of the profit goes back to the community, goes back to the NGOs, etc. So there are different models, but I would always say we have to combine. Part of the money should come from our creativity, but I think there is a duty of the state to finance those who are talking against the state.
That's a very high democratic value that you put there. I don't see it in our region yet. Let's be optimistic. Dragana, do you want to respond to any of the 3 questions that we had?
I would just like to add something about this crowdfunding. So somehow it started spontaneously after we published the stories and after first attacking through media on us. But it's really important, the creativity, and it's really important to make your crowdfunding campaign. That's what we will do. So it should last like for a month, and then you have to really like show people that you are doing it, or you just can, I don't know, tell them that you need this amount of money to investigate this topic, or let them to ask you what they would like to do, what citizens and readers would like to for example, from our point of view, it would be what you would like to investigate, or choose your top official politician or something like that you would like us to investigate him, for example, and also people that are, I don't know, recognized in the public, that they can go and tell in publicly, like if they're supporting us, to ask others to donate and so on. So, or we can also sell, or not sell, we can give them T-shirts and they can donate us. And so creativity is important, and it's important to have like real campaign for crowdfunding. That's our plan, what we're gonna do to reach that 4,000. 4,000
next year, and 40,000 we'll see when. But Javier, you had a specific question about basically the balance or the division of labor between grassroots level civil society and professional NGOs. But feel free to reflect on the other 2 questions if you want. Please.
Yes. First of all, the question regarding the labor issue or the political issue, I would like to answer by illustrating with the case of the Spanish mortgage law. The Spanish mortgage law was originated in the 1850s by the courts of Elizabeth II. It was an absolutist Bourbon monarch, and the law had that ideology. The law then persisted until Franco's regime, and was once reformed in 1947, which is the law that prevailed until Zapatero's reform in 2008. Democracy was reinstalled in Spain in 1975, and the constitution was dated in 1978. Ever since, no political party in nearly 40 years of democracy had been able to reform the mortgage law and to correct its sins. It took us to bring the Spanish state in front of the European Court of Justice for them to issue a verdict to force the Spanish state to reform the mortgage law. So yes, there has to be ordinary or classic political work. But in certain cases, where the classic political work is scandalously irrelevant and inoperative.
Or
Yes.
captured by the business. That's a classical definition of regulatory capture, when
Yes.
the business controls the regulation that is supposed to control them.
Yes. So in cases like ours, we just couldn't wait anymore, and we just couldn't trust anymore the politicians. So we had to do we collected a whole bunch of money, because bringing cases to the ECJ is not cheap. We did a lot of crowdfunding to send the lawyers to the court, and we have 3 positive verdicts that had generated these reforms. So when the classic political institutions do not work, citizens have to take the stand. To me, there's no other way. Regarding the religious groups, from the point of view of the human rights, no discrimination can be done either against or in favor of anybody. And I must say that I am completely radically secularist in this case. I believe that the best way to solve the conflict is from a strictly secular point of view, and the only way to guarantee and respect the rights of either religious group has to be with a very hygienic, almost chirurgical operation of the groups in power to avoid the leverage of the stronger groups and to protect the rights of the minority groups. So no one should prevail in terms of religion, because religion is something abstract. It's something that is not, that cannot be touched or given to one or the other. And as the gospel says, give Caesar what belongs to Caesar and God what belongs to God. So in terms of legislation, we should always remain in the civil point of view and watch for everybody's rights to be protected, and do not give the occasion of the more predominant powers or the more predominant groups to bash or to erode the rights of the minorities. And that also brings me to a last comment, which is that often the right-wing media or the right-wing groups often align with the economical powers, and most of them, they benefit from confusion and from fear generated by media messages. And this confusion and this fear, right media and right groups are very efficient in this strategy of creating abstract enemies, like anarchists, like religion, like political ideology, like gay rights or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's just to somebody that can be the target of the attack. And in that way, the social movements have the responsibility and also have the antidote for that, which is the organization. When we as civil groups organized and calm down the confusion and help people to focus in the important things. For example, if we complain that the asylum seekers are generating crowded schools for children, and you say we shouldn't allow any more asylum seekers because the schools are packed. Well, they wouldn't be packed if there wasn't somebody 5 or 10 or 15 years ago who took bribes for 50% of the budget, and instead of building a decent school, made a crappy school that now is unable to hold all these kids. So we are not about trying to expropriate or to seize the property of anybody. The state should watch that everybody's rights are observed and are respected. And when we say that we are against the economical powers, we are against the economical powers that benefit from tax evasion. And we are against the economical powers that benefit of deregulated markets that generate speculative economy and speculative investment. And all that together, the only thing that generate is poor people, poor working class, whose work is not enough to support their families. And that is the focus. That is where our attention should be driven, because having a decent livelihood is not about what you believe or what color you are or what country you come from. Having a decent livelihood is about being a decent citizen, paying your taxes, working, and exercising democracy. And the exercise of democracy, we all should be against that the exercise of democracy is corrupted or prostituted by economical powers. And that is what we should all be against. Because in that point, if we all manage to meet in that point, all of our rights are granted.
Thanks, Javier. Jutta?
Yeah, to answer the question I want to take on the two questions. I will start with, do we need to rethink funding from the Youth Initiative representative? I'm afraid, just so we're clear, that even investigative journalism in Western media is suffering what we are suffering now. So I think we're ahead of the game. They tell me we're ahead of the game. What do I mean? That they are turning to foundations to fund investigations, because all the Western media are cutting funding on investigative journalism. Is the first one that is suffering in terms when they cut staff. For example, The Guardian cut 30 staff recently, and it relies on a foundation. All of its articles we read are free and relies on being, that journalism relies on a foundation. Actually, it's hopeless. We have to just invent, I agree, we have to invent new ways, but almost we have to look into the possibility of wealthy people, what Americans are doing, American foundations, relying on the wealthy Americans who set up foundations and are funding investigative journalism. Maybe by some miracle we will reach a stage in the Balkans when some rich people would want to finance investigative journalism. Until then, I see no other way but rely on foundations. I am very provoked by your idea of ethical banks. I never heard about it. I feel very uninformed, but sounds great. How about an ethical bank? On the other very provocative, thank you for doing the provocation that you threw here with highbrow, what people believe. Perceptions are very important, extremely important in believing that actually what you put out there is the ultimate line, that it is, people believe that they are, is between peasants and highbrow people. The way you put the perception that some people have of civil society is dealing with hardcore, either security, this whole Russia thing, or human rights. In one way, you cannot, but you can. I understand why these activists did that, because you are talking about a country which went to war with all of its neighbors. What else could, of course it was a priority. In immediate post in the democratic years of Serbia, for us as neighbors and as Europe, it's normal that civil society here will deal with the most obvious question that Serbia has to deal with its past. That's why I made it an issue in the first panel here. But on the other hand, today, Belgrade, this city has its own civic movement that is dealing with with the issue of preserving the environment of its own city. What's happening with that movement, where that is not dealing with human rights, not dealing with Russia? They're being blocked by the media. That's what's worrying today. In today's Serbia, this new movement that's not dealing with hardcore Kosovo and Russia issues is being blocked by the media. They are being vilified by the state and arrested by police. So how can you expect for new movements to rise here if some niche NGO sees what is happening to these Yellow Patka movement? How would the rest of Serbia have courage enough to monitor its own local governance if they see the atmosphere in Serbia is such that a very kind of a new movement in Belgrade, in the city that is more cosmopolitan than Pristina, they're being arrested for what they're doing. It's really not an example of how you treat a civic movement. And Serbia, in that respect, has to allow, I agree with you, has to allow for more voices to appear. Other NGOs that are working on other issues here, I feel are sensing that if you want to do your work, you better not be prominent. You better not go out and talk about it. And that's why I think you're getting only the image of people like Milic and Kandic that seems to be the fighters who are exaggerating, but are not. But more space is not being allowed to local organizations. That's what I was saying.
Thank you. We didn't solve the question, and we didn't solve the question. Will civil society save democratic values? And I'm not going to ask you which democratic value you will save first, because I'm afraid that it will be the right of the fire brigade that yesterday was voted as the best institution in the region. The one institution that works in the region. For those who missed, so I'm not going to ask you that question. But I personally have a couple of takeaways of this discussion. And to me, it's, even if we didn't define what are those democratic values that we fight for, clearly I understood that there is a pluralism. And in that pluralism, there is something that I have not seen, at least personally, so much becoming prominent as in this panel. And I hope that's a sign of time. And that's actually getting more the economy on the table and getting also the issues that matter in the daily life of people. And I'm not saying that this should come at the expense of the other issues that are there, but to me that's definitely important. And even if it comes from the ideological premise of, we have to deconstruct and defeat the neoliberalism, which I have nothing against as a premise, but I believe a lot of people would. But I think it's important that the civil society starts getting into something which has been a territory, uncharted territory, that was just given to the markets and the invisible hand. The other thing that I'm glad is that I expected that we are not going to choose either or, volunteer, civil society, or professional. That's pretty much expected. But what I see is actually, I miss in some ways the exploration of the volunteer-based civil society. And I think that the current protest movements have the energy, or the past protest movements, because when I mentioned about Bosnia, Montenegro, Macedonia here, some of them are not active. But I believe that actually needs more to explore, not necessarily that we would like to see the new Podemos as there is in Spain, but definitely the movements that are around this interest, from the eviction, from healthcare, from better education. These are the things that probably will gather the massive support. And one question that I don't have an answer for is the question on the funding. And that's actually because of your electricity bills, Jeta. If people don't pay electricity bills, if people don't pay taxes, then we have a very tricky social contract. We don't have a social contract of a democratic state as we see in the textbooks. And then I personally, as a representative also of a donor institution, I have an issue, because if they don't pay the bills, if they don't pay taxes, how I can expect people to start giving money for their causes? In many ways they pay, but they're not aware. In some ways, a lot of population is a free rider. And I as economists, like to point out. And I think, to me, personally, I'm not saying that you said it, that's the sort of the next battleground. I think we took for granted that the theoretical model, it doesn't matter how we label it, it's in power. Well, it's not, you know, and therefore it's not a surprise that only 400 people will give money to an investigative journalist outlet instead of 4,000 or 40,000, because also 40,000 have not paid their bills, not because they don't have money, and even more have dodged the taxes because they think that's acceptable. And I think that the civil society, in order to defend the democratic values, will have to also think of what's the social contract it would like to operate on, more as a vision, less as what's in the current reality. I stop there. I think it's enough. We are almost in time with our panel, and I kindly ask you to please remain seated because we will have the closing address and finish the 6th edition of the Belgrade Security Forum. So I applause for the panelists, of course. Thanks.